All right, get ready, because we are diving deep into miracles today. And not just miracles in general, but how two major faiths see them, Islam and Christianity.
It's a really fascinating area, where like deeply held beliefs and these extraordinary events kind of collide.
Yeah, exactly. We got some pretty interesting sources to help us out today. We're going to be looking at a talk by Dr. Zakir Naik. He's got a really unique perspective on miracles in Islam. And we'll also be checking out this Wikipedia article all about miracles attributed to Prophet Muhammad. And finally, an excerpt from the My Islam website about Prophet Isa, better known to most people as Jesus.
Yeah, those sources give us a lot of different viewpoints, like how these different faiths approach like the supernatural and what that actually means for people who believe.
Totally. So by the end of this deep dive, my hope is that you'll walk away understanding those differences a bit better and that you'll have some really captivating examples of miracles kind of stuck in your brain and hopefully maybe even some brand new questions to think about when it comes to faith and like what's actually real.
You might even find yourself questioning some of your own ideas along the way. Who knows?
Okay, so let's jump right in. Dr. Naik starts his talk with something that really caught my attention. He says that every baby, every single child, is born Muslim. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a pretty bold statement, but when he says Muslim, he's talking about that core meaning of the word, which is one who submits to God. So what Dr. Knight's really saying is that we're all born with this built-in instinct to submit to something bigger than us, this natural spirituality. It's actually called fitra in Islam.
Hmm, interesting. So like we're all kind of hardwired for faith from the very beginning. But here's where things get kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Dr. Naik then goes on to say that in Islam, miracles aren't like the ultimate test of faith.
Yeah, that's super important to understand because he's arguing that even false prophets can do things that look like miracles. So if we can't just use miracles to tell if a prophet is legit, what do Muslims use? What's the real test?
Dr. Naik says it's the Quran. He says the Quran is the ultimate miracle. It's this miracle that lasts through time. And he compares that to Christianity, where there's more focus on the miracles that individuals performed.
Right. It comes down to how they see divine revelation. So to Muslims, the Quran is literally the word of God. And its beauty, how it's still relevant today, and even what some scholars say, about it having like scientific insights hidden inside, that's all seen as proof it came from God.
Okay, so it's not just about these spectacular events. It's about the message itself being miraculous. And that actually ties into what we see in the Wikipedia article about Prophet Muhammad's miracles.
Oh, absolutely. So the Wikipedia article points out that you don't really get these single neat narratives about Prophet Muhammad's miracles like you do in the Bible. It's more like you find individual stories scattered all over Islamic texts.
Right. But some of those stories are wild, like splitting the moon in half. Talk about a showstopper.
Yeah, really powerful image. But it shows how, even just interpreting scripture can change how we understand miracles. The story about the moon splitting, it seems to have come from a verse in the Quran, but it could be interpreted in different ways. It's not just about what happened, it's about how people have understood it over time.
And that makes me think about something Dr. Naik said. He said that the way nature works, all on its own, is already proof of God's power. So if we're surrounded by these miracles of creation every single day, does that change how we see those big, dramatic, interventionist miracles?
It's a perspective that a lot of Muslims today connect with, for sure. The idea that, the universe and how complex it is, all the laws of nature, even the fact that we exist at all, it's all a miracle, and it points back to this divine creator.
So we might actually be surrounded by miracles all the time.
Yeah.
If we shift how we're looking at things. That's pretty mind-blowing. But it also makes me wonder, if the Quran is the miracle, then what about the other miracles that people say Prophet Muhammad performed? Are those less important somehow?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. A lot of modern Muslim historians actually argue that Muhammad's biggest miracles weren't supernatural. They were what he did in the world, like uniting those warring tribes, creating a whole new social order, spreading a message that resonated with millions of people.
They're saying that his impact on history, his ability to totally transform society, that was the miracle. Huh. That's definitely a different way of looking at things.
It shifts the focus. It's not about breaking the laws of nature. It's about doing what seems impossible for a human being, changing the course of history.
Okay, so we've spent some time on the Islamic perspective on miracles, but now I think it's time to talk about Prophet Isa, or Jesus. We're going to use the excerpt from the My Islam website to help us understand how Muslims see his story.
Yeah, it's a really important area because it shows where Islam and Christianity have common ground, but also where some big differences pop up.
Right, because both religions have a ton of respect for Jesus, but in Islam, he's a prophet, not the son of God. He's seen as one of God's most important messengers, but not divine, like how Christians believe.
And you really see that difference when you look at how they understand the story of Jesus' birth.
Because his birth is still seen as a miracle in Islam.
Right.
The My Islam excerpt even compares it to the creation of Adam. They were both born without a father.
Yeah, and that comparison highlights how God has the power to create life in these amazing ways. But it also shows the Islamic belief that God doesn't have a son in like a literal biological way. Instead, everything that exists is considered God's children, but in a metaphorical sense.
So they're not saying that Jesus' birth wasn't a miracle. They're just looking at it through a different lens based on their own theology. But speaking of miracles, the story of Miriam, or Mary, before Jesus was born, has all these incredible details.
It does. The excerpt talks about how she was secluded during her pregnancy and how, like, food just appeared to help her during childbirth dates and water. It really shows how God was caring for Miriam when she was most vulnerable.
Oh, and get this, the Quran mentions dates as food for Miriam, and we know today that dates are actually super good for women during pregnancy and labor,
No.
full of energy and nutrients. It's kind of cool how this ancient wisdom lines up with modern science.
Yeah, I love that. It's like these old stories still have meaning for us today. It just shows that there are layers to these stories, layers of meaning that we might not get right away.
I love when those connections pop up. It's like the past is talking to us in this really cool way. Okay, so Miriam gives birth to Isa, and then things get even more amazing. The excerpt talks about baby Isa talking right from the cradle.
Right, and in Islam, that's a key event. It shows that he's special, miraculous right from the start. It's like a hint that he's going to be a prophet, and it shows that God can communicate through anyone, even a tiny baby.
And that's a huge difference from how Christians talk about Jesus' childhood. They focus more on him as a human,
Yeah.
someone who grew and developed over time. But Islam is showing us that Jesus was extraordinary from the moment he was born.
For sure. And that emphasis continues as we look at Isa's ministry in the My Islam excerpt.
Yeah, it talks about how he rejected material things, how he focused on forgiveness and mercy, and how he challenged the Jewish priests who were in charge back then.
Those are all really important parts of how Muslims understand Isa's message. He's seen as a prophet who wanted justice and spiritual purity. He wanted people to get back to the real heart of faith.
And we can't talk about Isa without talking about the miracles he performed.
No, we can't. The excerpt mentions a bunch, like breathing life into a bird made of clay, curing people who were blind or had leprosy, and even bringing people back from the dead. These are all ways that God's power worked through Isa.
It's interesting that the Quran often uses the phrase, by my leave, when it's describing these miracles. Like, it's making it clear that Isa only did these things because God allowed him to, not because he had his own independent power.
Exactly. Even these incredible acts are ultimately coming from God's will. And this idea that even miracles need God's permission is really important to how Islam understands one of Isa's most famous miracles, the table spread or the feast.
Which is kind of like what Christians call the Last Supper, right?
Yes.
Both stories involve food appearing miraculously, but I'm guessing the meaning behind them is pretty different.
You got it. So in the My Islam excerpt, it says that after fasting for 30 days, Isa's followers ask him for a table full of food straight from heaven. Isa reminds them to have faith, he prays to God, and boom, their request is granted. This amazing table comes down, full of food for everyone who believes.
Okay, I can definitely picture that. But I'm sensing there's a but coming.
Well, God's response also comes with a warning. He says that anyone who disbelieves is going to face a serious punishment. So it's showing us that seeing a miracle isn't enough. It's about how you react to it, what it teaches you about faith and trusting God.
So it's not just about the wow factor, it's about the spiritual lesson, the deeper meaning behind it.
Mhm.
And speaking of different reactions, Muslims and Christians have totally different views on the crucifixion.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. Muslims don't believe Isa was actually crucified, but that Allah raised him up to heaven. The Quran actually says that he wasn't killed or crucified, but that it just looked like him.
So it's not that they deny it happened, it's just that they have a totally different understanding of who was involved and what really went down. And this leads us to another huge difference. While Christians believe that Jesus was crucified and then resurrected, which is like central to their whole faith, Muslims believe that Isa was raised to heaven and will come back to earth in the future.
Right. Muslims believe that Isa will return, and that's a big part of how they understand the end of the world and the afterlife.
Wow, this comparison really shows how two religions can have so much shared history, but end up with completely different ideas about God. It's pretty fascinating and honestly a little mind-bending.
It is. It shows us just how complex faith and interpretation can be. And it's a good reminder that even in stories that seem familiar, there are all these layers of meaning and subtle details that shape how people believe.
This is making me think about miracles in a whole new way. It's so interesting how different cultures view these events. But you know what? I think it's time to give our listeners a chance to process everything we've talked about so far. We'll be back in a flash to keep exploring miracles in Islam and Christianity. Stay tuned. All right, deep divers, welcome back. Hopefully you had a minute to digest all that. So where do we go from here?
Let's go back to that idea of the Quran itself being a miracle. Dr. Naik really emphasized that, right? This idea that it's a miracle for all time, amazing people for centuries. And one of the things people point to are the what some scholars call the scientific miracles of the Quran.
Yeah, I've heard of those, but I got to admit, I need a refresher. What are these scientific miracles exactly? Like, is the Quran predicting the future of science?
It's more like there are verses in the Quran that seem to foreshadow scientific discoveries that weren't made until centuries later. They cover all sorts of things from like how embryos develop to, the universe expanding. Some people see it as like the Quran revealing knowledge that would have been impossible to have back then.
So the argument is that only a divine text could have that kind of scientific accuracy, right? I get why people find that compelling, but I imagine it's kind of controversial too.
You're right, it's a big debate. Critics say that these interpretations are way too literal. Like they're reading modern science back into these ancient texts. And they also point out that some of these scientific miracles don't actually match up with what we know about science now.
So it's complicated, with strong arguments on both sides. It shows that even with science, which we think of as objective, you can't escape interpretation, right? Your perspective always plays a role.
100%. That's why it's so important to think critically. Whenever we hear claims like these, we got to approach them with curiosity, but also a healthy dose of skepticism. Look at the evidence, listen to different opinions, and then make up your own mind.
Be an active participant.
Right.
Yeah, don't just take things at face value. Okay, we spent a lot of time talking about Islam. Can we switch gears and talk about how Christianity looks at miracles?
Absolutely. One of the main differences is how miracles are used to, back up a prophet's claims. In Christianity, miracles are often seen as essential proof. Like with Jesus, right? His whole ministry was full of miracles, and that's seen as evidence of his divine authority.
So the miracles were proof that he was who he said he was, the Son of God.
Exactly. And this focus on miracles as proof is all over Christian scriptures. Like the Gospels, they're just full of stories about Jesus' miracles. Those miracles are central to who Jesus is, to his whole story.
They're not just like side stories, they're key to the whole narrative.
Yeah, and to how Christians view salvation too, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Christian theology sees the death and resurrection of Jesus as the ultimate miracle, the event that made salvation possible for everyone.
It's through Jesus' sacrifice, his victory over death, that believers find redemption.
Exactly. And the resurrection, that pivotal miracle, is the foundation of Christian faith. It's what sets Christianity apart. It's the greatest display of God's power and love.
It's the miracle that changes everything. It gives hope and meaning to the whole Christian story.
Mm-hmm.
So powerful. I think that helps explain why miracles are so important in Christianity. But even though the specific miracles attributed to, say, Jesus and Muhammad are different, both faiths agree that God has the power to do extraordinary things.
Yeah, that shared belief in the miraculous is a big link between these two faiths,
Right.
even though their interpretations and, their theological frameworks are different.
That mix of common ground and different interpretations is what makes these deep dives so cool. It reminds us that even when we're exploring traditions that seem really different on the surface, there are these common threads running through human experience.
Love that analogy. Okay, let's circle back to Islam for a bit. Remember that Wikipedia article we talked about, the one listing all the miracles associated with Prophet Muhammad? Some of them might surprise you, even if you already know about Islamic history.
I'm ready for some more mind-blowing stories. Which ones stand out to you?
Well, we already touched on the splitting of the moon, probably one of the most famous and definitely debated miracles attributed to Muhammad. It shows how, A verse in the Quran, even one that might be open to interpretation, can end up becoming a whole miracle story over time. It shows the power of interpretation and storytelling.
And that back and forth between scripture and interpretation, it pops up again with another amazing miracle, the night journey, or Isra and Miraj.
Right. That story describes Muhammad's journey from Mecca to Jerusalem and then going up through the heavens where he meets all these prophets like Abraham, Moses, and Jesus.
It's so vivid, almost like a dream, full of symbolism. It shows Muhammad's role as the last prophet, and it connects all these different faith traditions, but it also highlights how important personal experience is in faith, right?
Yeah, it suggests that sometimes these deep truths are revealed through direct encounters with the divine, like even mystical experiences.
It's a reminder that faith isn't just about rules or doctrines. It's about having that deep personal connection with God. That's an idea you find across a lot of religions.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have the splitting of the moon, the night journey. What else is in that Wikipedia article?
Well, there are all these miracles connected to Muhammad's hijrah, his journey from Mecca to Medina. That was a huge turning point in Islamic history.
Oh, totally. It marked the beginning of the Muslim community, and it set the stage for Islam to spread. There's a story about how, these warriors from the Quraysh tribe were planning to kill Muhammad, but then suddenly they're struck blind and he's able to escape.
Wow. It's like God stepped in to protect him, to guide him.
It shows how faith can give you strength, even when you're in danger, even when people are persecuting you.
I like how these miracle stories always seem to have a deeper meaning. Like, there's a message beyond just the events themselves. They're teaching us about faith, about God, about how to live our lives.
You're spot on, and that's why they're so captivating, even for people who might not share those beliefs.
They connect with something we all feel, right? That desire for meaning, for something more than just the everyday stuff. Are there other types of miracles connected to Muhammad?
Oh, yeah. Wikipedia also talks about stories of him healing people, or food and water appearing out of nowhere, and even trees moving at his command.
Those sound more like meeting people's basic needs, like food, water, healing, protection. It shows a compassionate side of Muhammad.
It's similar to the miracles Jesus performed, healing the sick, feeding the hungry. There's this theme of divine compassion that you find in different religions.
So miracles aren't just about spectacle or proving something. They're about God's love for humanity.
Yeah, it's a message that speaks to everyone, regardless of what you believe.
It goes to the core of why we love these stories. That sense of wonder, that feeling of being connected to something much bigger than ourselves. Let's go back to Prophet Isa for a minute. I want to dig a little deeper into how Muslims understand his miracles.
One thing that jumped out at me from the My Islam excerpt is how much it emphasizes that, we humans, we're limited in how we perceive miracles.
You mean we don't always get the full picture of what's happening?
Exactly. So the excerpt talks about how when baby Isa speaks from the cradle, the people there are completely baffled. How can they possibly communicate with the baby? It's suggesting that miracles can challenge how we see the world.
Yeah.
They force us to realize that there are limits to what we know.
It's not just about the event, it's about how it opens up our minds.
Yeah. That openness to new possibilities is essential if we want to really understand miracles.
It's about embracing the unknown. It's about questioning our assumptions and realizing that there's so much more to reality than we can see. That's exciting. The world is full of hidden wonders.
And that sense of discovery is what drives us in this deep dive. The search for knowledge, exploring different perspectives, always remembering that there's more to learn.
It's about being curious, welcoming surprises, and appreciating how rich and diverse human experience is. Speaking of which, I think it's time to talk about something that's unique to Islam, the seal of prophethood.
Oh, yeah, that's a really important concept in Islam.
I've heard the term, but I'm not totally clear on what it means. Can you break it down for us?
Okay, so it refers to a metaphorical seal. Muslims believe it was physically present on Prophet Muhammad's body, and it means that he was the final prophet, the last in a long line of messengers sent by God.
So it's like a divine stamp of approval, showing that Muhammad is the culmination of all those revelations.
Right, and this has some important implications for how Muslims view prophecy and revelation in general.
Like what? What are some key takeaways for Muslims?
Well, first of all, it reinforces that Muhammad's message is complete and final. There won't be any new prophets or scriptures after him.
The Quran is seen as the ultimate guide, timeless and complete. But how does this impact how Muslims view other faiths?
Muslims respect and acknowledge all the prophets who came before, but they believe that Muhammad's message supersedes those earlier revelations. It's considered the most complete and accurate expression of God's will.
So it's not about rejecting other prophets or scriptures, it's about understanding them within the context of Muhammad's final revelation.
Exactly. And this encourages interfaith dialogue and understanding. It urges Muslims to engage with other faiths respectfully while still holding firm to the unique and complete nature of Muhammad's message.
It's about finding common ground, but also acknowledging the differences between traditions. Building bridges, not walls. That's such an important message in today's world.
Couldn't agree more. In a world that's so divided, it's crucial to have empathy, respect, and understanding across different religions and cultures.
It's about recognizing that we're all human, celebrating our differences, working together to build a world that's more just and compassionate. That's something we should all be thinking about.
For sure. And it aligns with the core teachings of both Islam and Christianity. Love, compassion, peace, those are the guiding principles.
It's about recognizing everyone's inherent dignity, no matter their background or beliefs. It's about being kind and generous to everyone. It's about working towards a world where everyone feels valued, respected, and loved.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired. We've covered so much, explored some really thought-provoking ideas. What do you say we take a quick break, let all this sink in, and then come back for our last segment where we'll wrap everything up and leave our listeners with some things to think about?
Sounds good to me. A little pause for reflection is always good. We'll be back soon to finish our deep dive into the world of miracles. See you soon.
And we're back. Welcome back to our deep dive on miracles. We've been through a lot, haven't we? Islamic perspectives, Christian perspectives, amazing stories. We even talked about what it means to believe in the supernatural. Yeah, it's been a journey unpacking all these layers of meaning and interpretation.
Totally. But, before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've been looking at how different religions see miracles. But what about the bigger picture? Like, what role do miracles play in our lives today, no matter what we believe?
That's a great question. If you kind of zoom out from all the doctrines and interpretations, what are miracles telling us about being human? Are they just stories from the past, or are they relevant to us now?
I'm thinking they're relevant, but I'm really curious to hear what you think.
Well, I think whether we take miracles literally or see them more metaphorically, they point to this deep human desire for something more than just the ordinary. We all want meaning, connection, hope.
That longing for something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And maybe miracles in all their different forms give us a glimpse of that something more.
Maybe they remind us that there's still so much mystery in the world, that there are forces at work that we don't fully understand. Do you think that's why we're drawn to these stories, these miraculous stories, no matter what our beliefs are?
I think so. It's that pull towards the unknown, the things we can't explain.
So instead of getting stuck on whether miracles are real or not, maybe we should be asking what they're trying to tell us. What can we learn from them?
I love that question. Maybe they're like a call to action, a reminder to see the magic in everyday life, to be grateful for what we have.
That makes sense to me. It's about being open to the idea that there's more to reality than what we see on the surface.
Exactly. Being curious, being willing to question what we think we know, admitting that we don't have all the answers.
That's a way of thinking that can make our lives so much richer, whether we're religious or not.
It's about cultivating that sense of wonder, embracing the unknown, seeing how everything is connected.
And who knows, maybe if we approach the world with that kind of open mind and heart, we'll start seeing our own personal miracles. Little moments of synchronicity, glimmers of something bigger than ourselves.
Those moments that remind us how much beauty and mystery there is in life.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into miracles, we'll leave you with this. If miracles are signs, what are they trying to tell us today? What wonders are waiting for us if we open our eyes, our hearts, our minds to the possibility of the extraordinary?
Keep diving, keep exploring, keep looking for those moments of awe and wonder.
Until next time.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring Islamic stories and content.